click that subscribe button and click that notification bell, and I'll bring you non-stop scary stories. Recently, I held a poll asking all you good fear-loving people out there where you listen to these stories, and it seems the majority of you answered while you were trying to sleep. So here's a little gift. Something I've done before, but it's nonetheless enjoyable. These are 10 allegedly true horror stories, told with rain sounds. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you get some rest. Even nightmares won't prepare you for the real-life horrors of this strange, strange world. The Big Black Dog by Dylan1315. I live in Australia down near Victoria on a little bit of land with around 40 cattle, 2 dogs, and 114 chickens. It was around 8 p.m. one night when this happened. My mom let me drive her car down the back road, which was about 12 kilometers up and back, in a little red Toyota. I got into the car and I told my mom that I would not be long. Before I left, she simply said not to go too fast. I had no trouble getting up the back road, and I spent some time just driving around. As it got late and I promised to be back sooner than later, I began to head back. But as I was driving toward home, I saw a pair of eyes on the road. They were coming from what looked like a dog, a big and black dog that was really skinny. It looked like it was eating on something in the middle of the road. I swerved, trying to miss the dog, but as I did, something ran straight into the back left side of the car. This forced me to hit a bank on the side of the road. Automatically, the car had turned itself off, and I couldn't breathe for a few minutes. After the wind came back in my body, I started thinking, what was I gonna do? But then my thoughts were interrupted by this awful smell. It was like rotten meat that had been left in the sun for hours. I felt like throwing up because the smell was so concentrated. All of a sudden, I heard something like walking. Whatever it was dragging its feet. It was dark out, so I couldn't see too well. I thought if I hit that thing, how the heck is it walking around? I quickly started the car and put my foot to the floor. When I made it home, I checked the back left side of the car. There was a huge dent in it, like some large animal had run full speed into it. I didn't tell anyone about my encounter, but I did get in a lot of trouble for wrecking the car. I did see those eyes again eventually, in the paddocks, which if you don't know is a small field or enclosure where horses are kept. I think this large black creature that looks like a dog, but is way too big to be a dog, is stalking the fields and forests around here, looking for things to eat. So I'm glad I didn't go walking that road that night, because if I hadn't been in a metal car, I might have been Chow myself. Grandma's Table by Denny Brum. This story happened about 12 years ago. My grandma bought a home in a Salt Lake City suburb in the 1960s after her and my grandpa had their first child together. And since day one, she thought the home was haunted. She said that even though it was clear early on that something was off about the home, she never felt like she needed to leave. It was her home, she said, and whoever else was there was welcome to stay, as long as they understood and respected the boundaries. Other than one story, Grandma says most of the residents there followed the rules and never gave her a reason to evict them. Over the years, my grandma welcomed more children to the house and it became a safe haven for my entire family. We used her home for most family gatherings, and many of us used the place as temporary residents a time or two. Much of the family has experienced something unusual in the home, and we usually blame it on the ghosts. 2 of my grandma's stories are the reason that I have one of my own. You see, my grandpa passed away in 1999, and several months after his death, my grandma was in her kitchen doing the dishes. She said she felt a strange feeling come over her, like she needed to leave the house. She later attributed this feeling to my grandpa. Before she could even finish her thought, she had a sensation that something very strong was grabbing her from behind and trying to force her down the stairs. She couldn't see anyone, but she felt something powerful trying to force her. She states that she fought back as hard as she could and managed to make it to her kitchen table. She sat at the table and held on to it, while this entity violently pulled and groped at her, and she would not let go. Finally, it just stopped, yet no one was there. The house was once again silent and peaceful. She said she had never been so scared in her life. While telling me this story at the same kitchen table, she told me of a little girl ghost that lived in the basement. She said the little girl would like to play pranks on people, pull off their blankets while they slept, and hide their things. She said she knew it was the girl because of the laughter. Grandma said the little girl would giggle mischievously, so she knew it was her. This little girl seemed peaceful in that she just wanted someone to play with. To this point, I had never experienced anything scary or ghostly in the home. But after hearing the stories for myself, I was creeped out being in any room alone in that house. But still, nothing more than a spooky feeling and an embarrassing run up the stairs ever happened to me. Again, to that point. Now fast forward a few years to that exact same kitchen table, only subtract my grandma and add my mother and two of my friends. We were all sitting around talking and planning our evening. My friends and I didn't have any money, so we settled into an evening at Grandma's house with my mom. At one point, we began telling ghost stories, and my mom and I decided to tell my friends about the house of horrors that we were currently sitting in. My mom told a story about the little girl. She too had an experience with her, so it made sense for Mom to tell it. The girl's story was met with enjoyment but disbelief, so when it was my turn to tell about Grandma's dishes incident, I was not surprised to see the same reaction in my friends' faces. That's cool, but I don't believe it look. Next, almost as if on cue, the cheap yet expensive-looking chandelier that hung above us just exploded. Now, I'm not talking about a blown bulb. I'm talking about 4 light bulbs actually blowing up. Glass went everywhere. After a few moments of looking around and at each other, we all decided we needed to get out of there. After tripping all over each other in an attempt to save ourselves, we all managed to make it out safely. We all left the house within minutes. My mom went on home while my friends and I went to get ourselves intoxicated. But for the rest of the evening, we talked about those ghostly pyrotechnics. Even now, as I recall this, it was the absolute most spooked out I've ever been. As we discussed what happened with some other friends that we met up with that night, I began to notice that familiar bullcrap look on their faces. Needless to say, though, my friends Brad and Ashley, the ones that were there that night, they believe all of our stories. The Smiling Shadow by Krisntell. I was over at my best friend's old house, just a small and cozy one-story house with a garage. I often spent most of my time there, seeing as at the time I didn't have very many friends, so I spent as much time as possible with my best friend, Michaela. As I was saying, it was a normal Friday night, and Michaela and I were settling down for the day and getting ready for bed. I was pretty tired, so it didn't take me long to fall asleep. However, as I was sleeping, something disturbed me out of it. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't move. I tried to fight against my own limbs, but they wouldn't move at all. I was completely paralyzed. Then it became hard to breathe. It felt as though someone was sitting on top of me, pushing down onto my chest. Extremely common symptoms for sleep paralysis. Still, I kept struggling, but I couldn't move. Then, as I scanned the room with my eyes, I saw it, a huge black mass standing over me, and it was smiling. I could see that crooked smile stretching over its face. I tried to scream then, but still, not a sound came out. I was trying to move, trying to scream, trying to do anything to get Michaela's attention, but I couldn't. This thing, however, just stood over me, watching and smiling, as if enjoying my terror. It felt like I was being held down there for hours, forced to stare back at this thing. I thought I was going to suffocate. Then, just like that, like the flick of a light switch, everything stopped. 1 minute the thing was there and then it wasn't. It simply disappeared right before my eyes. It's hard to explain. It was like I imagined everything. I don't remember falling back to sleep that night, but I'm sure I did, as I was soon awake to the smell of breakfast coming from the living room. I walked into the living room and sat there, thinking about the events of that night, while Michaela and her mother were all too happy, talking about things and cooking breakfast. But so many questions plagued my mind. Was it just a dream? Should I say something? What if they think I'm crazy? After some thought, I decided to speak about it. "Hey, Michaela," I asked. She looked toward me. Did you did you wake up at all last night?" Michaela raised an eyebrow and said, "No, why?" I explained. "I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. Last night I woke up in the middle of the night to this thing standing over me. It was all black, but it was smiling. I couldn't move, and I could barely breathe, and I was trying to call out to you, but I couldn't make a sound. I was so scared, I was suddenly cut off by her mother, Rose, asking, "You saw what?" She sounded quite surprised. Anyway, for as long as I've been back to Michaela's place, I haven't had an experience similar to that. But I do know that I hope I never see that smiling thing again. Midnight Creepy Crawlies by Vivi591. Honestly, I've had a lot of creepy stuff happen to me throughout my life, but this is the first instance which I can remember really well. I was somewhere between the age of 3 and 5. I know that I wasn't in school yet because I never went to Head Start or preschool. I remember begging my grandmother to buy me this package of plastic bugs at the store for $1 when we were out grocery shopping. This was a big deal because we lived an hour's drive away from town, so we only went about once a week. That night, I wanted to open them right away, but my grandma wouldn't let me because of something I had done to misbehave. She put them at the very back of the kitchen, right out of my reach. I ended up going to bed without getting to open them. I woke up in the middle of the night, though, which was unusual, because I was one of those people that you couldn't wake up with a brass marching band. I decided that I was going to go to the kitchen then and get my plastic bugs to play with. They were cheap little things, with one color each, and hardly any detail. I grabbed a step stool and climbed up on it, grabbing the package triumphantly. I tried to open the package carefully, but I ended up ripping it wide open, sending plastic bugs flying all over. I began to pick them up, and after about the 5th one, I felt something tickling my hand. I opened my hand, only to find that I was holding real bugs. I suppressed a scream and dropped them hurriedly. I looked around in terror, as the other bugs I had dropped were now crawling all over the place. They scurried away to hide, and I crept back to my room as fast as I dared. I went to sleep after my heart had calmed down. My grandma woke me up the next morning, demanding to know what I'd done with the bugs. I had left the stool in the kitchen in my panic. I told her what I experienced, yet she did not believe me. She'd made me show her all my hiding places in my room and in the front room, but the bugs were nowhere to be found. She grounded me for the weekend from TV. Several nights later, I woke up because something was tickling my arm. I sat up and let my eyes adjust, seeing a huge bug crawling on me. I quickly brushed it off. I then turned on the nearby lamp. I saw them all over the wall behind the headboard. It was covered in the rest of the bugs from that package. My grandparents rushed into the room and proceeded to pick the bugs off the wall with tissue. My grandma comforted me as I babbled incoherently about telling the truth, while my grandpa threw the now squished bugs in the trash and took it out to the dumpster. The next morning, probably not actually believing me but feeling bad about the bug thing, my grandma apologized. I told her it was okay and she ungrounded me. But the damage was done, and a lifelong fear of bugs set in. What caused everything to happen that night, I have no idea. But every time I get the sensation of something crawling on me, I freak out. There's Two of Them, by Samuel V. I was around 6 years old. We had this maid that came from the southern part of the Philippines. She was very hardworking. She did most of the household chores for me and my older sister. But one morning, she missed one thing to do. Me and my older sister were playing PS2 in the living room when someone rang on the phone. I was all too focused on playing the game, so my oldest sister answered. It was our mother. She had come home from work, so she was asking us to open the gate to our garage so she could park her car. My sister then asked the maid to go open the gate. Our maid went to the gate and opened it as asked. At least, that's what we thought. Later, after a few minutes passed, we were playing the game still, when suddenly the phone rang once more. It was our mother and she was mad. She said to open the gate already. With a furious voice, I decided to open it up myself. My oldest sister went upstairs to see our maid sleeping. She asked, "Why didn't you go open the gate like I asked?" "What?" she said. "I've been sleeping. What do you mean open the gate?" We said that we saw her downstairs, but she said I wasn't down there, I was sleeping the whole time. A few days later, the incident was brought up again, and we asked the maid about it. She said that something must have followed her from the Philippines, something her people called the manga gaya, which means doppelganger. I asked, "What is that exactly?" She answered, "When I was in the Philippines, almost every day I'd have friends and family tell me that they saw me in places that I hadn't been that day, and I would just give no response. I've always known that there was a double of me, but I didn't think it'd follow me all the way here. Whoever you asked to open the gate, that person was not me." There Is Something Living with My Aunt, by Kashapyro. My aunt and uncle live in Russia. They were visiting us in Georgia in May 2017 and October 2018. Every time they visited, my aunt would tell us a story of a creature called Domovoy. It started when my aunt, who we'll call Maria, was still in college in Krasnodar. There, she was renting an apartment from some old lady. She said the place was nice for a while, until the weirdness started. Things were happening, like books falling from their places, things moving on their own, and strange noises being heard. What happened next is the weirdest part. When my aunt was out to class and came home, her entire apartment was a terrible mess. Later, when she married my uncle and moved into his house in the same part of Russia, she still was experiencing some strange things. She had sleep paralysis several times and heard loud banging in her house at night. You see, the Domovoy is said to be a very moody spirit. It doesn't like being laughed at or not having its needs fulfilled, just like a small child. So, keeping up with the legend, my aunt would sometimes leave candy and treats out for it, particularly when the house would be empty. She said that whenever she got back home, the candy would always be eaten. My aunt says it was never left untouched, and if she didn't leave candy out, things would always be a mess. She eventually learned to live with it, and always had candy in store. After moving out of that apartment, it didn't seem to follow her, because the events stopped after that. My aunt says she was simply glad to get out of there and no longer have to worry, never again having to worry about whether or not she remembered to leave out some candy. I live on a farm in the woods of New England, and every night at 3 a.m., my dog starts barking. By Raven95. My story begins about 3 weeks ago. Around here, that meant summer was just beginning to give way to fall. Everything seemed normal, until I began to hear scratching on the outer wall and roof of our home, specifically in the upstairs bedroom at night. I never bothered to investigate or go outside for the first week. I simply tried to write it off as mice in the walls. But when the motion sensor porch lights began to come on, I knew it was something larger than a mouse, so the mouse excuse was no longer working. When those lights began to get turned on at night, I knew we had a problem. Due to past experiences, I thought it was an old internet stalker I had. One day I asked a friend of mine, Alex, if he had heard or seen anything out of his window last night. We lived together. He responded, "Ah, yeah, I thought I heard you stomping around on the front porch or something like that. I just thought you were letting Zara out to use the restroom. Zara is our dog." At his response, my eyes grew wide with panic and paranoia. "I didn't go outside after sundown, Alex. Nor did Zara." "Calm down, I'm sure it was just hiss." He tried to reassure me, talking about our old gray barn cat, but I quickly retorted, "Barn cat footsteps do not sound like people." I stomped back into the living room, beginning to worry. I walked up the stairs to unbury my uncle's old 12-gauge, which had been stored away. I spent the rest of the day disassembling the old cannon while Alex was at work. After reassembling it, I cleaned it and oiled it. I strapped on my knife and headlamp. Then cautiously I stepped outside to feed the rabbits hand-cut grass from the crates on the front porch. During the day I had neglected to feed them, choosing instead to prepare this weapon. That was going to be the first night that I would protect our farm from whatever was bothering us, and I couldn't be sure how ready I was. Stepping into the cool night air past the second heavy wooden door on the front of our cabin, I looked out into the sparsely illuminated blackness of the forest in front of me. I didn't notice it until I was done giving the male rabbit his grass, but that night was supernaturally quiet. There was utter silence, and as any hunter or huntress will tell you, that's bad. This sudden realization hit me like a freight train. As I was standing up from the female's cage from just having latched their door, I heard a single heavy footfall on the gravel driveway behind me. In one swift motion, I grabbed the already racked and loaded 12-gauge, and I spun around on my heel, stammering out, "Hello?" After I turned, I caught sight of a large lone coyote in my headlamp. It was about 100 feet away, and it seems to freeze mid-step, like a child being caught stealing from the cookie jar. So I yell out, "Oh, come on, get out of here, get!" And this seems to startle it enough to break its trance-like state, as it runs off to the forest's edge another 150 feet from me. But that's when everything changed, when normalcy was completely thrown out the window, when that coyote made it to the trees. It stopped, and it turned back to face me, only to raise itself up on 2 legs. We locked eyes then, as it held itself up with one paw braced against a tree. Then it opened its mouth wide and slow. As its mouth opened, the cries of 100 different coyotes echoed out from it, Scared out of my mind and feeling threatened, I lost my nerve and I fired a deer slug at it, center mass, right in its solar plexus. The creature fell backwards into the ferns, after which I saw the ferns rustle violently as something scurried away through them just below sight. By then, Alex was running outside to see what all the commotion was about. He was holding a machete and a flashlight, wanting to know what that howling sound was. He looked like some kind of cartoon parody of a farmer. In a panicky tone, I explained to him what I just experienced. Of course, he seemed skeptical at first, as would any sane person, but then he suggested this. "Let's go see if you got it." "You can't be serious, Alex," I replied. "You think chasing a hellhound singing at me with every voice from a barbershop quartet isn't scary enough. You want to chance it through the woods." I chirped sarcastically at him, then remembered to ready another buckshot shell, just in case. Before I had even finished the sentence, he began to approach the trees, so I followed him. After a few moments of standing in the location the creature had been, we began to hear a rustling noise, and as Alex turned his back, a brown furry mass the size of a medium-sized dog flew through the air towards Alex's back. In a split moment, I fired once more, either scaring the thing back into the bushes or actually hitting it. Alex spun around. "Are you just firing off into the darkness?" "No, you didn't see that? It was coming right at you," I answered him. "Let's get back inside." I began to sprint out of the woods, back to the safety of the porch. I could hear Alex's frantic footsteps behind me. When we made it back inside, I slammed the door and locked it. After catching my breath and reloading the 12-gauge, the two of us went over to a dresser in the living room. We pulled out a bundle of cedar smudge sticks and cleansed and barred the house with old-world nature magic, which had been passed down from my family. Though still we have the odd occurrence on the farm to this day. It does seem whatever is stalking our home is now wary of the property, but I'm not taking any chances. Whenever I go outside at night, I'll be holding this 12-gauge close. To anyone who's planning on exploring the old towns and forests of New England, bring weapons, and maybe even a shaman. The Skinwalker in Broad Creek by Flat French Fry. This is a story about what I saw on my last camping trip with my friends from the Boy Scouts. Me and my friends at the time were going to the rifle range to finish up our rifle merit badge. We all had a good time, but I was the last one to finish up, so they ended up leaving me there until I was done, so that meant I had to walk back by myself. Our campsite was on the other side of the camp, and it's down a long gravel road. As I was walking through that gravel, I began to hear sounds in the forest right next to me. I simply thought it was another campsite, so I ignored it and continued on. But as I make it to the offshoot of this trail, to where the other camp should have been, I saw that their campsite was empty. Now I was beginning to get a little suspicious of these sounds in the forest. Sounds like footsteps and breathing. So I start to jog, nervous that something was following me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I see it. Something with long, lanky limbs and eyes that reflected a dreadful yellow. I can see ribs pushing up from underneath its skin, and bones that seemed angled and broken. I'm standing there in shock. I feel like I need to throw up. I see the form of the thing get closer and closer, until I hear another sound, a smaller set of footsteps coming toward me. It's one of my friends coming to check on me since I was taking so long. He grabs me by the shoulder and we take off toward the camp. As I'm walking away, I look back, and there that thing is walking right behind us, almost out of eyesight from the tree line. That's when I get a good look at its face, which is the most disturbing part of this story. because the face is a human face, but it looks more like a loose mask. As we get closer to our camp's campfire, the thing seems to grow disinterested and disappears into the trees. It was the strangest thing and the scariest thing that I've ever experienced. If I have anything to say, it would be, don't go hiking alone in Broad Creek. Enjoy the following 2 creepy stories that you may have heard before, but maybe not. They've aired on this channel before, but I thought you'd like to hear them again, or hear them for the first time for my new subs. Enjoy. The Lake Story Beast, submitted by Austin W. I'm a 17-year-old guy in my senior year of high school. I've tried telling people this story, but no one has believed me yet, except for my friend Jacob. Jacob only believes me because he was there as well. Now, I've always believed in various cryptids ever since I was young. I watched TV shows like The Lost Tapes. This last summer was full of adventures and different experiences, but it was by far the most terrifying summer I've ever had. You see, I spend a lot of time hiking or longboarding at our local park in my hometown in Illinois. Anyone who knows me knows that if I'm not working, I'm at the lake or at home practicing the guitar. I'd been working at the town's water park as a lifeguard since I was 15, and I'd made many friends there. But Jacob was the only one I was truly close to. We'd get coffee from time to time, or just drive around in the country, but Jacob wanted to hang out afterwards. Now, I had just finished a double shift, and I really wanted to go to the lake. He agreed, and after work we went there together. I asked Jacob if he wanted to go down some of the trails. He answered with a nod. We had finally reached a set of trails I've never been down before, and it looked just as cheery as the rest. No sooner than 30 minutes into the walk, the sun was going down. But Jacob and I wanted to keep going. That was our first mistake. We eventually got down to where we could hear the sounds of the lake. But 5 minutes or so later, we were laughing after a joke I told when we came upon a fallen tree. We decided it was a perfect time to take a break, so we sat down on the fallen tree. Jacob pulled out a pack of cigarettes and lit one. We sat and enjoyed the silence. Silence, I thought to myself, and I spoke up to Jacob. That's weird, man. It's never this quiet around here at night. He took a slow drag from his cigarette and listened. I stood up to stretch, and I asked him if he wanted to continue down the trail. But before he could answer, Jacob noticed something. Hey, do you see that? Down there by the edge of the lake. I looked down. I had thought it might have been a lost dog or a deer, because they can be seen regularly around here. I've even returned a couple of lost dogs to their owners from here before. Before I could say anything, he moved past me and said, Austin, dude, I think that's an injured dog. I began to follow him as he made his way towards it. As I was walking behind him, I was looking at the ground because we were walking off path, and it was getting harder to see the darker it got. The next thing I noticed was that Jacob suddenly stopped. I walked right into him, sending us both falling to the ground. My glasses and phone fell off my face and out of my hands. When I picked them up, I looked around. Jacob was gone. Jacob, I stopped in my tracks. That dog that he had thought was there was not a dog. Whatever it was had a long and distorted body. Its legs and arms twisted among themselves. It was skinny and looked like it hadn't eaten in days. It was pale gray with tufts of fur on its arms and legs. The scariest part about this thing was its eyes, those soulless black eyes. Its mouth had no lips, instead forming straight into sharp, jagged teeth. It had a small nose that looked like it had been ripped apart by something. I gasped as I trembled to my feet, not daring to take my eyes off of it. Then it opened its mouth, and it said my name. It sounded like Jacob.
Austin.
I nearly soiled myself at the sound. I began to walk backwards when I tripped over something and fell onto my back. The creature then stood suddenly, towering over us. My hand gripped a small rock no bigger than my palm, and without rationally thinking, I threw it at the creature, who didn't even flinch. When the rock bounced off its arm, it almost sounded like it was laughing. It got down on all fours and crept towards me, and that's when I lost it. I turned and ran. As I ran, I could hear this thing crashing and stumbling through the woods. I ran for what seemed like forever. I could finally see the clearing. Jacob was in his car already, and he was revving up the engine. "Come on! Hurry! We need to get the hell out of here!" Nearly tripping over the loose gravel, I ran around Jacob's car. Before I even got the door shut, Jacob floored it. I looked back, and there, out of where I just came from, was that creature sitting on its knuckles. I closed my eyes and told Jacob to just go. We drove for 20 minutes. My eyes were closed, and I was too terrified to open them for a while. We filed a police report, and they sent a couple of officers out there. A couple of days later, we got the report back. They said that the most out-of-the-ordinary thing they saw were mutilated rabbits' bodies. They told me not to worry about it, and if I'm still too worried, just avoid going there. I didn't need to be told something like that. 3 months have gone by, and Jacob doesn't like to talk about it. I finally lost it. I asked what did he see when he went down there. He said when he walked down there, the thing was sleeping. He described it just like I did, and when I walked into him, he said he fell right in front of it, waking it up. And that's when he turned and ran, as I laid there dumbfounded. He apologized. He just said he was scared, more than he'd ever been. I can't blame him, because I was truly as scared as he was. Neither of us stood a chance against that creature. If you're ever in the Midwest state of Illinois, in the Knox County area, stay away from the lake, because you never know what's in the dark waiting for you. The Unknown Monster, submitted by Paige L. I used to be an assistant manager for a local dollar store, and I did a lot of closing because of school. And I was on a health kick at the time. So one night, while the weather was still good, I decided to walk home after closing up shop with my best friend, whom I'd gotten the job for as the cashier at the same store when I moved up. Her name was Amanda. I lived with my grandma at the time, and she only lived about half a mile away from the store, about a 15-minute stroll in all. It was already dark, but I didn't care. I lived in a nice neighborhood. I mean, the worst we ever got was occasionally a drugstore robbery. Plus, I'd walked this path 100 times before. I knew this town like the back of my hand, yet, for some reason, this night I felt uneasy. I've had what I believe to be supernatural experiences before, so I'm familiar with that heart-in-your-throat feeling of being watched. I had my phone flashlight on so I could see the uneven path, but the feeling of being watched got so bad that every few meters I'd turn around, only to see that nothing was there. This kept happening until I reached my grandma's street. I turned down the road and kept walking, but something kept nagging me, telling me to turn back one more time. I listened, and I regretted it. But then again, it might be the only reason I'm alive today. What I saw was a tall, emaciated, humanoid figure crossing my grandmother's road. It didn't look at me, but I could see it so clearly in the streetlight. It was disturbing to behold. It was so thin, I could have used it as a reference for a skeleton. It also had a strangely dog-like head and massive hands with long claws. Like I said, thankfully, it didn't see me, and it kept walking down the street. I stood there frozen until it made it to the other side, and once it was out of sight, I booked it back home, which was luckily only a few houses away. I sat in the living room with my grandma, shaken and barely composed. Then my grandma said something that made my heart sink. She asked if I had seen the news. I stuttered, no, and she went on to explain that a man had took his own life after a standoff with a SWAT team near the elementary school. The man wasn't in the school, but he lived close enough that if he made a threat, someone would have to intervene. What really put me on edge, though, was that this man had no known mental illnesses, and according to his family, was completely stable. And this had happened only a few hours ago. I managed to control myself, eat some dinner, and try to sleep, but that night, sleep wouldn't come. All night long, I heard shuffling through the mulch under my window, and once I even heard a hand slam against it. Thankfully, I had thick curtains, because if I saw that hand, I would have screamed, alerting the entire household. I stayed up all night, drank some coffee to keep my attention focused, and only slept when the sun came back. I was then gone all weekend as I was going out of town for a convention. Luckily, nothing happened then, but when I got back home, things got worse. I opened the store the next few days, and I kept seeing something out of the corner of my eye, just out of the windows. Slowly, my opening shifts came and went, and soon enough, I was back on the night crew, where I'd be closing shop and walking home as usual. Well, at the very least, I had Amanda with me on these closing days. There's a quick thing about Amanda I need to say. She's been a very firm believer in the supernatural all her life. She believed that she was living in a haunted house, where something was possessing the basement. Knowing her backstory on the supernatural, I told her what I'd been experiencing, and she was clearly put on edge about it. We kept working through our shift until it finally came to an end. Suddenly, I felt like I was being followed again, but now on my walks home, I was far too afraid to turn around. I ended up asking Amanda if she saw anything trailing me whenever she saw me walking home. She swallowed hard before she replied, and I found myself anticipating her dreadful answer. I didn't want to say anything, she said at first, because I didn't want to scare you. The other night, I swear I saw something tall and thin following you home. It wasn't a person, and it was far from any creature I've seen before. During this whole time, I was texting another friend who knew more about demons and creatures of sorts, and he said that it sounded like it was hunting me. He laughed at a theory he told me, saying that the creature was a demon spirit, that it was the reason the man had committed suicide, and that it was trying to get me next. And I'd seen it more than once. On one occasion, it appeared as just a shadow, like a vapor of itself, as if it was some sort of shapeshifter. I would believe that, considering how it looked half-human already. For a while after talking with some friends, it backed off slightly, but I could still feel it stalking me. One day I walked right past the window to stock some paper plates, and when I looked out the window next to me, I saw it, leaning its upper body against the glass, its claws pressed hard against the surface. It was staring right at me, and if there hadn't been a window there, the only thing separating us would have been a few feet. After that, I had trouble working the rest of the day, and I wouldn't go home unless Amanda gave me a ride. Luckily, she didn't mind. She enjoyed my company. We're like sisters, so she took me home without a problem. It's been a while since I've seen it. I still can't figure out if it's a physical thing or some sort of evil spirit that's following me. All I know is it's terrifying to behold, and even more horrifying to think about how it's stalking me, maybe even at this very moment. What makes the sound of the rain so peaceful, so relaxing? If you think about it, it's really just noise, white noise, but somehow it makes us feel at rest, at ease, sometimes a little inspired, and maybe other times a little bit creeped out. I hope you enjoyed these rain sounds and scary stories, and I hope it leaves you restful enough to have a very, very good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget you can send your story at darknessprevails.org. If you want to support my channel, click the shop button below or go to teespring.com/store/darknessprevails to check out my merchandise. Or go to patreon.com/darknessprevails and donate any amount. My patrons get access to ad-free MP3 downloads of our episodes, and they get their names in the credits of these videos. As usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, about 5 forest horror stories. Jose Chavez says, "Need some sleep paralysis stories on here." Well, you might be pretty happy about this video then. Psychopathic Alien says, "Guess who's going camping soon?" Well, if you're going camping, you psychopath, you're going to absolutely love or hate tomorrow's camping stories video. Chief Ramirez says, "Hey, love your videos. I just want to hear you say my name." Well, how did you like that, big boy? I'm Just Me says, "I wish I lived in a forest now." It's overrated. No internet where I used to live, and those dang turkeys were annoying. And Wind says, "Giant snowstorm in Canada right now. Thanks for the content, Darkness." Well, I hope everyone makes it out okay. Stay safe, and enjoy something to pass the time. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are coming soon. They always are. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.